On the morning of November 3, 1904, Henry Wells walked into the offices of the U.S. Geological Survey in Denver, Colorado, 27 days after he had departed for the San Juan Mountains with a survey party of 6 men. He arrived alone. The administrative record is unusually spare. Wells presented himself to Chief Surveyor Malcolm Hendricks at approximately 9:15 a.m. His clothing, according to later testimony, was in serviceable condition. He carried his field notebook, his compass, and a canvas rucksack containing hardtack, 2 boxes of matches, and a canteen half filled with water. He did not carry a rifle, though he had departed with one. Hendricks would later testify before the inquiry panel that Wells appeared composed, if notably thin. He sat when offered a chair. He accepted coffee. And when asked what had become of the other 5 men, he placed his field notebook on Hendricks's desk, stood, and said only, "I won't be speaking about it." The notebook contained elevation readings, geological notes, and weather observations covering 16 days. On October 23rd, the entries stopped. Hendricks pressed him. The inquiry panel would press him. A federal marshal named Coughlin would press him. Wells's own brother would press him, in letters preserved in the family archive, with increasing desperation and anger. Henry Wells never spoke of what happened in the San Juans, not in legal proceedings, not in private correspondence, not apparently to his wife in the years that followed. The historical record offers testimony from 37 individuals who encountered Wells in the weeks and months after his return. Not one reports him breaking his silence. Several note that he would leave rooms when the subject was raised. One, a journalist named Faber, describes him walking out of a restaurant mid-meal when pressed. The 5 men who did not return were Edwin Calhoun, the party's senior geologist, Robert and Thomas Milliner, brothers employed as field assistants, James Lightfoot, a camp cook and packer, and a young surveyor named Peter Voss, 23 years old, recently married. Their bodies were never recovered. What follows is an attempt to reconstruct, from available sources, the shape of the silence Henry Wells maintained for the remaining 41 years of his life. The expedition was routine. Survey parties had been mapping Colorado's mineral-rich ranges for 2 decades by 1904. The San Juans, though remote and steep, were known territory. The planned route would take Wells's party through the Uncompahgre wilderness, collecting rock samples and verifying earlier topographical work. Expected duration, 3 weeks. They departed Ouray on October 7th under clear skies. Personnel records describe Henry Wells as methodical and reliable. At 36, he had worked for the survey for 9 years. He was not the expedition's leader. That role fell to Edwin Calhoun, a Yale-educated geologist with 15 years' experience. But Wells was well regarded. A photograph from the summer of 1903 shows him among a group of surveyors at a Denver social function. Lean, bearded, unsmiling but not severe. He stands slightly apart from the others. He had married Louise Marsh in 1901. They lived in a modest house on Champa Street. No children. Louise Wells's diary, donated to the Colorado Historical Society in 1961, mentions Henry's departure for the San Juans only once. H left this morning for the mountains, expected back by month's end. Made him promise to write if delayed. No letters arrived. The Milliner brothers, Robert, 31, and Thomas, 28, were experienced packers. James Lightfoot had cooked for survey crews across 3 territories. Peter Voss was the newcomer, hired that summer on Calhoun's recommendation. Voss had filed his own field reports on 2 prior expeditions. They reveal a precise, almost poetic attention to landscape. In one passage, he describes dawn breaking over the Sangre de Cristos as light the color of old brass, spilling down the rock faces like something poured. There is no record of prior friction among the men. A supply manifest lists standard provisions: flour, salt pork, coffee, canned tomatoes, beans. Surveying equipment, tents and bedrolls, 3 rifles and ammunition for hunting, rope, an axe, 2 lanterns. Hendricks approved the manifest on October 4th. The last confirmed sighting of the full party was on October 19th. by a trapper named Samuels working a line near the Cimarron River. He reported seeing their camp at dusk, smoke rising from a cook fire. He did not approach. In his statement to the marshal, Samuels recalled, "They looked settled in, nothing strange about it." After that, silence. The inquiry panel convened on November 18, 1904, in a federal building in Denver. Its purpose was not criminal prosecution. Henry Wells was not charged with any crime, but administrative, to determine what had become of 5 government employees and whether negligence or misconduct had occurred. The transcript runs to 214 pages. Wells appeared on the first day. He was asked to describe the expedition's route, the condition of the men, the weather, the terrain. He answered these questions. His responses were brief but sufficient. Yes, they had followed the planned route. No, there had been no illnesses. The weather had been cold but clear until October 21st when snow began. Then the panel's chairman, a man named Colborne, asked him to describe the events of October 22nd and 23rd. Wells said, "I cannot help you with that." Colborne, "Cannot or will not." Wells, "I will not." Colborne pressed. Wells remained silent. When threatened with contempt, Wells's attorney, hired by Louise, argued that his client had broken no law and could not be compelled to provide testimony in a non-criminal proceeding. The panel moved on, attempting to extract details through indirect questioning. They established the following. Wells had been separated from the others at some point after October 22nd. He had traveled alone for several days before reaching a mining camp near Silverton on November 1st. From there he took a coach to Durango and then a train to Denver. He had reported the loss of the others immediately upon reaching civilization. How had he become separated? I will not say. Had the others been alive when he left them? Silence. Had there been an accident? An avalanche? Had someone fallen? Wells sat motionless. Was he responsible for their deaths? At this, his attorney objected. Wells himself said nothing. The transcript records long pauses. At one point, Colborne adjourned for 15 minutes, apparently hoping the recess might loosen Wells's resolve. It did not. On the third day of testimony, the panel attempted a different approach. They brought in Edwin Calhoun's widow. She sat across from Wells and asked him simply where her husband's body might be so that he could be buried. The room was silent for what the stenographer notes as approximately 2 minutes. Wells finally said, "I am sorry. I cannot tell you." Mrs. Calhoun wept. Wells did not look away from her, but he did not speak again. The inquiry concluded without resolution. The panel's final report, filed in January 1905, is remarkably candid in its frustration. It reads, in part, "Mr. Wells has cooperated in all matters pertaining to logistical and procedural questions, yet he has refused, with no satisfactory explanation, to describe the critical events that led to the loss of 5 men. His refusal appears willful and absolute. We have no legal mechanism to compel further testimony. In the absence of evidence suggesting criminal conduct, we can only conclude that the party met with disaster in the mountains, the precise nature of which remains unknown." Mr. Wells's silence, while personally baffling and morally troubling, does not constitute grounds for dismissal or sanction. Wells was permitted to return to his work. He did not. He resigned from the survey on January 9, 1905. A federal marshal named Coughlin launched an independent search for the bodies in the summer of 1905. Using the route described in Wells's field notebook, he found the remains of a camp near timberline, tent stakes, charred wood, a tin cup. He found no human remains. His report mentions unusual weathering on the tent stakes, as though exposed for far longer than 5 months. The search was abandoned after 3 weeks. Louise Wells stopped writing in her diary on November 15, 1904. The final entry reads, "He will not even tell me. I do not think he ever will." They remained married. Tax records show Henry Wells employed intermittently as a clerk and later as a bookkeeper for a dry goods company. They moved twice, first to Colorado Springs in 1907, then to Boulder in 1911. Louise died in 1923 of pneumonia. Henry did not remarry. Peter Voss's widow, Anna, wrote to Wells in 1906. The letter survives in the archives. She does not ask what happened. She asks only whether Peter suffered. There is no record of a reply. The families of the Milliner brothers hired a private investigator in 1908. His report, filed after 6 months of work, offers little. He interviewed Wells twice. Both times, Wells declined to answer questions. The investigator's final note: subject is not evasive. He is immovable. I believe he has resolved never to speak, and no appeal to conscience or curiosity will change that. Journalists made attempts. The Denver Post ran a feature in 1910 under the headline, "The Man Who Came Back. What Does Henry Wells Know?" The article speculates wildly: cannibalism, murder, madness. Wells did not respond. When a reporter named Faber tracked him down at a restaurant, Wells stood, placed money on the table, and left without a word. Faber wrote, "He did not appear angry. He appeared final." There are no photographs of Wells after 1904. His brother, Thomas Wells, wrote 17 letters between 1905 and 1912. Excerpts: "For God's sake, Henry, what happened to those men? You owe their families the truth. Your silence is cruelty. I do not understand you anymore." The letters stopped in 1912. In 1927, a researcher named Dr. Evelyn Kress, studying traumatic memory in war veterans, attempted to contact Wells. Her notes indicate he agreed to meet her once. They spoke for 20 minutes. Kress recorded the meeting. "I asked Mr. Wells whether he would consent to describe, in general terms, the nature of his experience in the mountains. I clarified that I was not interested in assigning blame, only in understanding the mechanisms of memory and silence in the aftermath of catastrophe." He listened politely. Then he said, "I appreciate your work, Dr. Kress, but I cannot help you. I made a choice a long time ago." I asked if he had considered that speaking might ease his burden. He said, "It would not." I asked if he believed silence was protecting someone. He did not answer that. He thanked me for my time and left. Kress noted, "He did not appear haunted. He appeared resolved." Henry Wells died on August 2, 1945 in Boulder, Colorado, at the age of 77. The death certificate lists heart failure. He left no will, no personal papers, no instructions. His estate, modest, was settled by a distant cousin. His field notebook from the San Juan expedition was found among his belongings. It contained the same entries that had been reviewed in 1904. No additional notes, no explanations, no map marking where the others had been left. On the final page, in pencil, someone, presumably Wells, had written a single sentence years after the fact. The handwriting is shaky, suggesting it was added late in his life. It reads, "I have kept my promise." What follows is conjecture, bounded by archival constraint. Henry Wells survived something in the San Juan Mountains in October 1904. 5 men did not. The specifics remain unknown because Wells chose to keep them unknown. This was not amnesia. It was not trauma-induced muteness. It was decision. The question is not what happened. The question is why the silence. Several theories have been advanced over the decades. Guilt. Perhaps Wells made a choice that saved his own life but doomed the others. Perhaps he abandoned them. Perhaps he took the last of the food or fled while they slept. This theory is simple, and it explains the silence as shame. But it does not explain the tone of those who met him. Shame curdles into defensiveness, evasion, self-justification. Wells displayed none of these. He was not evasive. He was clear. His silence was not the silence of a man hiding from judgment. It was the silence of a man abiding by a rule, orders. Perhaps the party encountered something, a military operation, a classified mining venture, a federal action that required their silence. Perhaps Wells was sworn to secrecy, and the others were killed to enforce it. But there is no evidence of government involvement beyond the routine survey work. No classified sites existed in that region in 1904. And if Wells had been silenced by external authority, why did he resign? Why did he refuse even to hint at compulsion? Protection. Perhaps the truth would have endangered someone still living. Perhaps one of the men did something monstrous, and Wells's silence shielded their family from knowledge of it. Perhaps he was protecting a survivor, someone who escaped and wished to remain hidden. But no other survivors emerged, and the families would have welcomed even painful truth over the void. Promise. The final line in his notebook, "I have kept my promise," suggests an agreement. But with whom? The dead cannot compel promises. The living do. What if Henry Wells made a promise to one or more of the men before they died? What if they asked him not to speak? What if the truth of their deaths or their final hours was something they could not bear to have known, and Wells honored that wish for the next 41 years? This theory has weight. It accounts for the tone of his silence, not shame, not evasion, but fidelity. But it raises another question. What kind of truth would men dying in the mountains wish to keep hidden? Dr. Kress, in her 1927 notes, observed that Wells did not seem haunted. This is worth considering. Haunted men unravel. They drink, they rage, they seek absolution or oblivion. Henry Wells did none of these things. He worked, he paid his taxes, he lived quietly. He carried the silence the way one might carry a stone, not with anguish, but with weight. In 1938, a historian named Richard Osborne interviewed several of Wells's former colleagues for a study on early survey work. One of them, a man named Pruitt, recalled Wells as the most honest man I ever met. Honest, not evasive, not broken, honest. What if the silence was the honesty? What if what happened in the San Juans was something that could not be spoken without betrayal, not of the truth, but of the men themselves? We return, finally, to the only evidence that survives. The field notebook, the testimony, the refusal. 16 days of entries, weather, elevation, rock samples. On October 23rd, the entries stop. Wells walked out of the mountains 27 days after he entered. He walked alone. He reported the loss immediately. He refused to explain. For 41 years he kept his promise. The historian's task is reconstruction, but some silences resist reconstruction. They are designed to. Henry Wells knew what happened to Edwin Calhoun, Robert Milliner, Thomas Milliner, James Lightfoot, and Peter Voss. He knew where their bodies lay, or why they could not be found. He knew whether they suffered. He knew the sequence of hours that separated the living from the dead. He chose not to say. The inquiry panel called his silence baffling and morally troubling. The families called it cruelty. But perhaps it was neither. Perhaps it was the last act of loyalty that 5 men in the mountains asked of the one who would survive them. Perhaps the horror was not that Henry Wells refused to speak. Perhaps the horror was that he had to refuse, because what he carried was not his to tell. The San Juan Mountains remain. Snow falls. Stone endures. And somewhere in those peaks, 5 men lie unreturned, their silence kept by the one who came back. Henry Wells's grave is in Boulder, unmarked except for a simple stone, name, dates, nothing more. He kept his promise. We will never know what it was.